And here we are for ThirtyAndNerdy.com. I'm Matt.
And I'm Scott.
And I can be reached on Twitter at 30andnerdy. And Scott, you're over at...
SW Hannon, Hannan.
And this is going to be our Daredevil Conversation Podcast.
Correct.
Yeah.
The Daredevil TV series came out on April 10th. It's produced by Netflix and Marvel. And it's pretty important because it's another one of Netflix's TV shows that they're using to sort of take over network television or prove that there's a secondary market. So yeah, do you have any thoughts that you want to dive into before we dive into the real discussion?
Before we dive into the real discussion, I'm just curious as to if you were anticipating this or had any expectations or whatnot. Because like I myself, I think I've gone on record being our Facebook page, just saying that like I thought
it's true
that based on the trailers that this was going to be a pile of garbage. And granted, I for the people listening, I haven't really talked with Scott yet about our kind of our personal feelings about how it turned out. But I thought it was going to be a stinker, and I think it turned out to be quite the opposite, from my opinion, just kind of overall. But did you have any expectations?
You know, I didn't know about it until the week before it came out.
What?
Yeah, I hadn't heard a thing. Yeah, I guess I was just hanging out in a different corner of the internet. Mm-hmm. And so I saw that Netflix was coming out with a Daredevil show. And honestly, without seeing a trailer, I thought, I bet it'll be good.
Because it's Netflix?
Because it's Netflix, and because I think Marvel takes their stuff pretty seriously. And between Netflix and Marvel and not having broadcast, FCC sort of regulations, hammering them, and without the sort of family audience necessity that like a network show would have to have, even if it's trying to be edgy, I gave it the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. I always wonder with like any of Netflix's programming, Daredevil included, just what it must be like from a production standpoint to have to film and edit and, go through all the other layers of production for something like, and have, like 13 episodes-ish that you're going to put together before you even get to share it, with everybody. And then so to go through all of that production, all that time and all that waiting and anticipation, and then what it's like to have people just binge watch it in an entire weekend, and just kind of like how that feels, versus, regular television programming or like a film or something like that. Like is there any benefit? Is there any payoff for them, both financially and, I don't know.
Well, it pays off for Netflix. Netflix just recently hit 60 million subscribers worldwide, which is massive. So these sorts of shows, plus their catalog at large, it's clearly paying off for Netflix, and it's in their interest. But it does feel weird, or I would guess it feels weird for the creators to spend. Imagine making a 13-hour-long movie, and then people watch it in a weekend and forget about it by next month.
Yeah.
Like when Netflix came out with The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. I watched one episode because, again, I didn't know about that until about a week beforehand. And I watched one episode and went, I'm going to watch the rest. And then I did that in the course of like 3 days.
Yeah.
And I loved it, but I haven't thought about it very much recently. I don't discuss it too much. Whereas like 30 Rock had a months-long attention span because an episode came out each week. I don't know if it's in Netflix interest to try a model like that where episodes come out each week, but now they've got competition with HBO now, because HBO comes out with their stuff once a week, but they've also got their online streaming option. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Netflix likes the reaction that HBO gets versus dump, one episode per week versus the binge watching entire season dump.
Yeah, I was trying to think about where like Netflix makes their money also, like besides obviously, subscribers and stuff like that. And like when stuff like this is finished, I guess, like I don't really go into Best Buys very much anymore. And if I do, I just completely avoid their Blu-ray and DVD sections. I don't know, just because I've pretty much gone digital for that kind of stuff. But I was like, yeah, they'll have DVD, Blu-ray sales. And then even watching Daredevil, like I was like, oh my God, like I kind of want to check out like the comic books now and stuff like that, and like hop on one of the Comixology app and stuff like that and see what's going on with it. And so I guess they kind of They do. Like, shows like this also, like, generate, like, conversations and get people interested in, like, action figures and comic books and all these other areas, you know, that, like, Marvel is, you know, like, producing content for and stuff like that. So I guess overall it's got to be really good for everything they're doing, you know, both Marvel and Netflix.
Yeah, it's wild speculation on my behalf, but I feel like the comic book movies have a different audience or have a larger audience than the just comic books. You know, that me, like, I don't read all the comics that I go see. I don't read the comics that the movies are based on necessarily. You know, so I didn't read Winter Soldier, but I saw the movie. And a lot of the comics I read aren't even really superhero related. I've only just recently read some Superman stuff. So I wonder if maybe these TV shows are sort of blending the audiences more strongly and then building them on each side so that the people who read a comic book but maybe didn't go see the movie because they were more loyal to comic books are in fact watching the TV show because it's more in the episodic style that they're used to from the book or from the, you know, the weekly or monthly magazine that they read.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd be interested to see.
Yeah. Okay, so you had no expectations. I had low expectations. I think from here that we can just kind of start diving into like the core content and then just segueing and whatnot as necessary from here.
Okay, well, and before we do that, let's just go through some of the credits real quick.
Yeah, for sure.
The show stars Charlie Cox, who plays Matt Murdock / the Masked Man, or the Devil's Hell Kitchen, or eventually Daredevil. And that's a point I really want to come back to, because it's something that the Cape didn't do that I like. Deborah Ann Wool plays Karen, who is their secretary / the first victim that they help out. And they, I mean... Matt Murdock's best friend Foggy, who they open a law office together. He is played by Eldon Henson. By the way, Matt, do you know who Eldon Henson is?
You know what? He's one of those actors who I feel like I've seen in 50 other movies, and he always plays kind of like a dopey kind of character. Mm-hmm. And so it's like I didn't look up his credits, no, but I felt like I know that face, and this is a very similar yet different kind of role for him, and I was really happy that he landed it, actually.
Yeah, let me blow your mind just a little bit here.
Oh,
Do you recall the Mighty Ducks?
Oh!
Do you remember their ringer, Fulton?
Oh my gosh! Fulton?
Fulton.
Oh my goodness. So we moved back to California in November, and I feel like, therefore, somewhere in October or September, we were over at my sister's house, and we watched Mighty Ducks because we were reminiscing with her and her boyfriend and stuff like. Oh my gosh! We watched the second one. We watched D2. Oh man.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
You're right. My mind is blown.
All right, good.
Okay,
good. Then I'm done for the episode. You can take over from here on out. And then Vincent D'Onofrio plays William Fisk, who is essentially he's the big bad corporate guy. He's more or less, and I don't know the history of Daredevil at all, but he's basically Lex Luthor to Daredevil.
He is. And
he's bald, he's big, and he's corporate. So.
Hasn't, like, everybody battled him? Doesn't, like, he's part of, like, obviously the whole Marvel universe, but, like, Spider-Man is, you know, gone up against him and a bunch of other, like, superheroes and whatnot also.
I have no idea. That's way out of my wheelhouse.
Okay.
Furthermore, the show's written and produced, or various duties are handled by two pretty big swingers here. Drew Goddard, who I believe wrote and directed Cloverfield. Mm-hmm. He wrote several episodes of Lost, as well as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and his newest project after Daredevil is going to be The Martian, starring Matt Damon, based on the book by Andy Weir, which was maybe my favorite science fiction book of last year, and it's definitely probably in my top 5.
Interesting.
Maybe top 10, depending on how carefully I think about it.
I want to toss in there also, I believe, director credits for The Cabin in the Woods.
That is correct.
Yeah, I love that movie. So
Yeah, they're experiencing a little bit of legal trouble right now. Somebody's
I heard they
suing Joss Whedon, saying that they ripped him off. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think Joss Whedon is one of those guys who would be really forthcoming if he stole something that blatantly. He'd be more like Tarantino to say, yeah, I took this idea from it. So I also think he's more creative than to just steal something wholesale, so I doubt it's going to go anywhere. And the second person on our list here is Jeff Loeb, who I know from the graphic novels Long Halloween, Dark Victory, Hush. He's also a producer on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and if you go through his IMDb list, he has had his thumbs in a lot of the superhero TV pies of late.
Interesting.
He's sort of legendary. I feel like he's one of those names that everybody knows but nobody talks about. But that's maybe just me.
I was going to say, Was it? I tried to pay attention to the credits on like each episode, but oftentimes, because when we binge watch and stuff like that, I just start fast forwarding the intro sequence and whatnot. Did Drew? Is it Goddard or Goddard?
Well, it's Goddard, so
it's like Goddard.
Yeah.
Did he do that thing where he kind of conceptualized the whole series, literally directed the first 2 episodes, and then I believe after that, isn't there a bunch of director credits that just kind of like swing in and out of each episode? Or
yeah, on the IMDb page, he's actually not listed as director for any episode.
Oh,
and
interesting.
He's listed as creator, and he's listed as having writing credits for each episode. But of course, that doesn't mean he wrote each episode. It means he maybe dabbled in a little bit, and because he's producer, he's there the whole time. So we're at a point where, well past the studio system where you had a dedicated job and you did that and you didn't spill over. So filmmakers now, guys like Drew Goddard, they may be listed as the producer, but they've also got their hand in the writing, and for TV direction, or the directors sort of not back burner, but they're just there to run the set mostly. So it's really hard to say where someone's influence begins and ends, especially with television. So do you want to give us an overview of the setup for the show?
Sure. We've got so Matt and Foggy. Also, by the way, do you know, is Foggy's name in the comic books literally Foggy? I didn't look that up, but I always just thought it was an interesting name. Like, I didn't know if this was something.
I mean, it sounds like a nickname, but his credit on IMDb is Foggy Nelson. So.
Yeah, just okay. Interesting. I didn't know, if his parents literally named him Foggy, or like you were saying. Like, okay. So we begin with Matt and Foggy opening their law office. Very shortly after graduation, they make it seem, or after they've conceptualized what it is they're looking to do post graduation and whatnot, and so they're short on clients and experience, and they go through the process of bribing a cop that I forget if it's that they both know him or if it's kind of like somebody that Foggy knows, but
it sounds like somebody Foggy knows because he mentions that they've known each other since they were in grade school or something like that.
Yeah, and kind of comedic also that they bribe him by buying his mom cigars.
yeah, they bribe the cop's mom essentially with cigars.
Yeah, and they say like, hey, if anything interesting or it comes in through the department or whatever, let us know. We need to get our first client and whatnot. And that ends up being Karen, who is the lone suspect at a murder scene.
Yeah, she's found kneeling over her coworker in her own apartment. He's dead. She's bloody. Obviously, obviously it looks pretty bad for her. Yeah.
So they take /force Karen. They have her. Wait, what? How am I trying to word this? They
force her to let them represent her.
There you go. But I'm trying to think of like the process of like the conversation that they had where they like get her to see that this is a good idea. Basically, they say to her, you look guilty as hell, and we're not sure how many people are going to want to represent you. Yeah, and so you should pretty much just take us despite our lack of experience because it's win-win for both of us.
Yeah, and I guess they decided to do it pro bono because they need the experience.
Yeah. And then, let's see. So it turns out that Karen has been wrapped up in a United Allied, and you have written here perfectly stupid corporate name.
Yeah, it's perfect. United and Allied mean the exact same thing.
Yeah. You're right. I didn't really, yeah, wow, okay.
It's perfect.
Yeah, and an attempt to cover up their seedy attempt to buy up and do something in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially there's some corporation that's buying up a whole lot of real estate in Hell's Kitchen, and they're fudging numbers in the books to do so, and she discovers it, and she tries to talk about it with her buddy at work, and bada boom, bada bing, one of them ends up dead, and she ends up in jail.
Yeah. That was a side note here. That was one of the things that I thought was really interesting. I guess like I try to stay up to date on like the news and world politics every single day, even if it's just from like using my phone and like scrolling through something like like Feedly and just getting all sorts of information. But I rarely take the time to like look into things like how do big businesses work and whatnot, and whether it's true or false or just kind of what's the word I'm looking for. basically, like in Daredevil, I like how they talked about how, like big businesses, when things go awry, will break down into like little businesses and like distribute, like assets and stuff like that, and then like hold auctions and try to, rebuy their own stuff at their own auctions and piece themselves back together under different names. Like I'm saying, like whether that's true or not, blah, blah, blah. Like I thought it was interesting that they actually took the time to tell those stories in this series also to kind of, just like build this world,
Yeah, it's interesting because it sound. I'm looking for the metaphoric or symbolic parallel here, but it's interesting that this giant corporation has to break down into little pieces to rebuild itself, and I don't know if there's a direct parallel there, but it's an interesting concept to have to deal with in a superhero story.
Yeah, because like despite the fact that they probably wouldn't have to, go through means like that because like everybody in the city is in like United Allied / Fisk's pocket anyways, it's like they still do have to worry about things like the FBI and like the government overall and whatnot. Yeah, but anyways, moving on.
Yeah.
Okay, so we say that from there on out, Fisk's evil plot is revealed to involve drugs, human trafficking, and
I don't know if there's much more than that. Like I kept trying to figure out it's something we can bring up later, but I kept trying to figure out what his big evil plot actually was and what it entailed, and I had a hard time following it. But can you think of anything other than like the drugs and the human trafficking? In terms of other than just like as his means to the end of his scheme.
No, I think that about sums it up for now. Yeah, I'm with you in that we should try to piece that together because it was one of those areas where I felt like I understood what he was all about, and then kind of like when I read your outline, I was like, maybe that wasn't really clearly laid out how, his involvement in drugs and human trafficking was helping this city that he loves, this city that he loves so much. And
yeah, well, and I think that's the strongest thematic of the show is intention versus result.
Yeah. Well, I do know, like, I feel like it's almost like he loves the city. He loves its character and its concrete and, just kind of like the city as a whole. And I think he's, one way or another said that he just believes that it's polluted and full of scum and that essentially he wants to wipe the scum from the city. But I don't understand how like pumping drugs into the city is going to help that unless he is hoping that everybody eventually ODs on his heroin. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then in his mind, guaranteed everyone with a heroin addiction is scum.
Yeah, so. Because it's like, like heroin addiction obviously, is going to lead to higher levels of like crime, and it's just like, whatever, Fisk. We'll talk about more about that later. Anyway, so we have meanwhile Nelson and Murdoch and Karen become increasingly large thorns in Fisk's side as he tries to clean up, quote, this city. Yeah, and then you have here, even though the entire show only ever refers to the neighborhood of Hell's Kitchen. Yeah, so it's almost like, hopefully Fisk realized that Hell's Kitchen is but a neighborhood in a larger city.
I mean, that would be like me trying to clean up Lincoln Square when I was in Chicago and then like ignoring the rest of the city of Chicago.
I love this city. Yeah.
and then constantly referring to it as this city.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm gonna sweep my corner of the sidewalk, and that's it.
And then we got the side characters. We've got Ben, who's the reporter, Claire Temple, the doctor who saves Matt from his dumpster dive. Fisk, he picks up a girlfriend who is constantly in danger.
I forgot to put her name down there. Her name is Vanessa.
Oh, okay, yeah. Which I actually do want to talk a little bit about that also. She was a character that Gina and I would always talk about, trying to figure out like what it was that she saw in Fisk rather, and I had a few theories about that, just kind of like character in general. And then we've got like Fisk, who flips out every time something happens with his child tantrum.
Mm-hmm. And then the show sort of evolves along those lines. It gets a little bit bigger, a little bit harder, and the conflict between Matt and Daredevil and Fisk involves pretty much everybody around them, and Karen continues to get wrapped up in it further. Yeah. So does Ben. Claire kind of disappears, but then Foggy gets pulled in too.
Yeah.
So, any thoughts before we move on to the next portion?
No, I mean, as far as like going deeper into like characters and stuff like that, should we just tackle all that stuff after we do like the style of the show, and should we do that in like the themes department and whatnot?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's just address like the style. So
Okay.
For me, the first thing that pops out is its action. It's streets ahead of any other TV show. There's one other show that some guy at school told me had really great action. I forgot its name. But I think it's pretty clear that Marvel and Netflix decided that they wanted to do some pretty highly choreographed, very artful and stunt-based action, and I greatly appreciate it. I don't know the style of fighting, but it's fast. The hits feel really hard. It's violent. You know, people don't just get hit and then fall back, but like they break bones and blood gets shed. Faces go into, you know, spikes on fences and things like that. So it's quite violent, and I appreciate that because it's not completely senseless violence. My problem, though, is that generally, with the exception of one scene in the second episode, the camera work and the editing cut around the really well choreographed, very interesting action. Yeah. And it gets worse throughout the course of the series, which is really frustrating because it's some of the best fighting that I've ever seen. And it's even better than most movies that come out. And I feel like they waste the efforts of their choreographers and the visuals that they could be developing with this, you know, holier than thou sort of editing.
Yeah, you have here that it's like you said the, you know, crummy camera work and editing, and then to top it all off, it's the lighting in the show is always very dark, and so that also adds to not being able to see anything. It was like one of those shows that we had to, you know, sometimes we like watching shows with like a light on in the very background of our apartment, just, you know, to help our eyes and stuff like that. I was like, no, we turn the lights off for this show because even a little bit of light shining on like the TV from behind, it was like you can only see half of what's going on.
Yeah, it's a very dim show in that as far as aesthetic is concerned, and that only hurts the visuals when you're cutting like crazy and shaking the camera constantly. Yeah. But at the same time, there is that fight at the end of episode 2, which is, as I described to my friend, as if Emmanuel Lubezki had shot the hallway fight from Old Boy.
Yes!
It's not quite that good, but when I watched it the second time, it's spectacular. The camera sits pretty still. The action takes place about mid-ground instead of foreground. And there's a lot of really careful choreography that goes on there. He'll be fighting one guy and then accidentally fall over just as somebody punches over him. Or he'll narrowly avoid or narrowly hit somebody just as they're moving. And it's very nicely choreographed. And on top of that, and this is something the rest of the action of the show shares as well, is that the fight is dynamic. He's not always on top. He's not just some superhero that comes in and lays waste to everybody. He's a dude who gets the crap kicked out of him, you know, and he experiences injuries along the way, and those impair his ability to fight as he goes along. Yeah. And that makes the fight feel like a drama instead of just a spectacle.
Yeah, one of my favorite things in watching him fight. You're right. He does. He spends half of the series he's getting stitched up.
Yeah, he's always bleeding.
Yeah, but one of the things I feel like they showcase, and he does this throughout the rest of the series too, with his combat style, is just the pushing himself off of walls and spinning around to build momentum and stuff like that. It's like you could tell he's in a different league from, you know, kind of like Street Thugs and Fisk's Men and stuff like that, in that like those guys don't think about like building momentum. They're much more like, you know, straightforward in their approach to like punching somebody. And in Daredevil or Matt, he's not a big guy, you know, and so using that moment, oh man, I just loved watching it.
Yeah, I think if the show had been shot and edited more calmly, I would be orgasming over the action in the show, because what you can see when you can see it is beautiful. It's fast, like I said, it's fast, it's hard, it's acrobatic, and it's creative as well. You know, there's at the end of that hallway fight, there's a point where one guy's on the floor in the back. He just knocked a guy through the doorway, and there's a third guy in the hallway who's starting to come up at him, and he almost falls over, but he catches his shoulders on the wall and then just sort of flings himself forward again so he doesn't fall over. Yeah. It's a beautiful character moment, too, as he's trying to stay up, and he uses, like you said, his environment to his advantage, and whereas the other guy was just sort of, the other guy's on the floor next to him.
And the thing that's also kind of, I don't know if beautiful is the right word, but adds to the intensity and the importance of it is while he's making his way through that hallway, mind you, as we know, he's already bloodied and battered from like a previous confrontation and stuff like that. He's just barely been stitched together when he goes back in there. But it's like we know that he's going to save like the boy, you know. And so oh man, yeah.
Cool. And then the next thing that caught my attention was the way that they display his usage of superpowers when he decides to enact them. And they're not quite superpowers in the typical sense, but instead of having like the whole world suddenly turn a different color and splash us in the face with a bunch of special effects, it just focuses in on whatever sense he's using. So if he's listening, suddenly all the other audio dives down and you can hear what he's listening to. And it's not this big flashy sort of early David Fincher moment where the whole visual changes, but it just very calmly slides in to this effect and then slides back out. If he's looking at someone in particular, they'll do like the tilt focus in on that one small piece and then zoom back out. And there aren't big special effects to show that he's going in and out of this either. It's just in and out, and it's consistent. That's nice.
Yeah. I was wondering how they were going to handle some of that. Especially, did you see the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie back in the day? Or
I did. I don't remember it though.
I remember it because, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that my taste in film nowadays is perfect. But back then it was even crappier. And so, like, I saw that movie and I actually, despite all its flaws, like, thought it was, I had fun with it.
I did too.
I thought one of the interesting things that they did was, you know, like when it rains and like all the, you know, vibrations and stuff like that from the raindrops, it was almost like he could, in that movie, it was portrayed like he could literally see the outline of, you know, the woman standing across from him and stuff like that, the love interest in the film, and pretty much everything in the environment. And there was that one of the earlier fights in this Daredevil where it's raining outside and stuff like that, and I was kind of like, oh wow, are they going to use that same visual style to show how he's seeing? You know, are they going to basically let us know that when it's raining, you know, because it's so noisy outside and there's so many, you know, vibrations and things like that, that he can see extra well? And they didn't exactly do that, and I really, really appreciated that they didn't go about it the same way, you know?
Yeah. They chose their own style.
Yeah. And there's that one scene where I think it's Claire. Claire was a Rosario Dawson character, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And she's talking with him, and I think she asks him something along the lines of like, how does he see and stuff like that, and what does he see? And there's that shot where he says like basically the world's on fire, and they kind of show you for just 10 seconds, if that, kind of like sort of like what he sees, you know.
Yeah, I got a question about that.
Yeah.
How does he see that? Is that through his eyes, or is that through all of his senses building in his head?
That's what I took it as, like literally, almost
okay.
like if
because he says he can see.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I think it's more of like the like a mental projection that he puts in front of himself.
Okay.
Or kind of like if you close your eyes right now and you can kind of see. Well, no, I was going to say like when we close our eyes, we actually see whatever light is coming in through our eyelids still. So he can't even see that, hypothetically, you know?
Right.
Which is weird. So he wouldn't even see, like, whatever colors we can see there. Yeah, I don't know. It's got to be just a mental projection of everything he hears. And all of his other senses also. It makes it seem like, subtle changes in temperature. That was, in the beginning of the show when we were watching it and stuff like that, like, especially Gina would be like, well, how did he know that was there? And how could he do that and whatnot? And I was telling her that my understanding of his character was that it was more than just hearing, that it was all of his other senses were heightened. And I like how they addressed that also, that he gets, temperature changes. He could taste the air like a snake, essentially. And,
he can feel the vibrations in the air.
Yeah. And it's almost, it blows my mind that he, like, almost literally does see more than people who, are not vision impaired and stuff like that. I think that's so cool.
Yeah.
But where were we?
that was pretty much it. It's interesting to see how the show. I'm just curious about how the show displays his superpowers, because one thing I was thinking was that if there was anything still coming through his eyes, then when he puts on the mask at night, he can't see. And so I just wasn't clear that it was. That the world on fire that he does see came through all of his other senses, excluding his eyes, or if his eyes Because, he gets splashed in the face with some sort of acid, right? That's what happens when he's a kid.
Right.
So I wondered if maybe the acid left some sort of impression on his eyes and he could only see the world through this acid burn. I don't know. That's not clear. It's probably not that important. But it was something that I was wondering as I got towards the end of the show, is just how consistently his superpowers are used. There's one point at the very end where he can suddenly hear talk over the radio, and he chases the van that's carrying Fisk away down because he heard the radio, and I thought, that might be a bit much.
I think yeah. I mean, at that point, aren't you kind of, it goes back to the acid in the eyes and kind of like whatever he did or didn't gain from like literally whatever was in the chemicals of that, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I think actually it would be easier to chase a SWAT van that's surrounded by cops simply by regular sound.
Yeah, true.
He wasn't far from it in the first place. I think it'd be tough to find. Yeah,
the other thing we have to remember is that it appears like he's got this ability to hone in on something. And so like when he focuses in on the radio and stuff like that, he's cutting out every other traffic or fan or like city sound, that he's surrounded by and just focusing it. It's almost like he can narrow out frequencies or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to sort of sarcastically suggest that's what he's doing. Yeah. But the show's just it's not clear about that topic.
Right.
And, I don't know how clear it needs to be. For the longest time, we just sort of accepted superpowers because X technology interfered, gamma rays for the Hulk or, Superman's from another planet and so on and so on, The Fantastic Four got blasted while they were in outer space. Was that also with gamma rays? I think it was. But anyway, it's like whatever big cool mystery technology or science or phenomena is that we're dealing with at the time, they come across it and, blank check for superpowers.
Yeah.
But it's more interesting if those superpowers have limitations, So one thing I was thinking about recently with Superman is that if his powers come from the light of the sun, how interesting would it be if, he gets caught underground and there's no sun down there?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, what with Daredevil do we have? I'm not looking for his kryptonite per se, but maybe I am.
His kryptonite may just be that, like, literally aside from these senses and stuff like that, he's just a man,
Yeah. They even mention that, I think it's in the episode 4, when they say, when the Russians are talking, I think it's Anatoly and his brother, and they're talking about, why they don't say Fisk's name, because what's his face is very insistent that you never say Fisk's name, and they're trying to build him up as this big superhero or like supervillain thing, and so the Russians like, why, why he doesn't want us saying his name is because he doesn't want us to think that he's a human being, and then they say, yeah, but so's this guy in the mask, So and look what he's done to us.
Yeah, so. Every single time Matt/Daredevil got into a fight where like people were like firing guns at him, I always just like held my breath because I did feel like despite how amazing he is, in combat and whatnot, all it takes is one of those bullets to hit him, and
the show does a great job of making him vulnerable at all times. Like we said earlier, he's always getting stitched up, he's always bleeding, and he'll spend entire episodes unable to not necessarily fight because he still goes out anyway, but when he's in those fights, you can see he's holding his side, or he's favoring one side of his body, or he's trying to avoid, or he's slower, or he's more methodic, and things like that. So the show keeps him vulnerable, which is nice.
Yeah, and as we kind of, to segue us a little bit, because one of the next things that we're going to talk about are some of the characters, I was going to say, with that vulnerability, I personally thought that one of the things the show did really great was kind of, towards the end of the show, especially, say, like the last 4 or 5 episodes, I think one of the things that made me bite my nails the most, so to speak, was I didn't know who was going to live through this season or not. It almost felt like anybody could have gotten taken out at any time. Obviously, aside from like Matt and Fisk, it seemed like anybody else was fair game. Yeah. And that throughout the series, they proved that by just like offing main character after main character,
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to discuss those details. Are we going to make this? A spoiler cast? I guess we should have asked that ahead of time.
Oh.
Because I think those are important details, and everybody's had 2 weeks now to watch 13 episodes. I think.
Yeah, we'll say it.
I think it's fair game.
Yeah, and yes. Spoiler cast from here on out.
All right. I think their decision to kill Ben was, and the way that they handled his death was fantastic. Because I kept thinking he was going to die early, and he didn't die early.
Okay.
And then I was like, oh, well, if he doesn't die by this point, then he'll be a staple of the show. And then he died.
Yeah.
So for me, they timed it quite nicely. I kind of hated the scene where he died, but that we can get
how
into
they
later.
made him go, or just the build up to it, or
I mean, we can get into Fisk when we get into the other characters. Oh, somehow we didn't put Fisk down there. Okay, we have to add Fisk to our list of characters. But aside from Vincent D'Onofrio's baffling performance of Fisk, he sits there and he kind of pontificates about technology, and then he decides to choke him out. I don't know. It felt like every time he was, everybody in the show by the end is getting these little, like, semi-anecdotal bits of insight, and everyone gets their chance to try and be profound in their little personal musings, and it got overwhelmingly boring and less interesting as well. Early on when Matt is in confessional with the priest, that's a great conversation because he's talking about his dad's quality. Mm-hmm. And you're getting a sense for when you go back when I went back and rewatched the first episode, I started seeing the rest of his character that you learn about or that you see develop over the course of the series, and it's all right there in that opening conversation.
Yeah.
And it's not strong enough to let you know that right away, even though you know it's the opening monologue and here he's laying the groundwork, but you don't really understand its poignancy until you go back and rewatch it. Maybe that's a value for a TV show on Netflix. They want you to rewatch it, but by the end, people are just sort of wandering through these little musings, and it got so boring. And why did he sit down? Why did he have to talk to Ben before he choked him out? Why did he have to do it himself? Fisk was pretty baffling to me by the end of the series. So Ben's death didn't really work for me. Also, he seemed to leap across the room in no time and had his hands around his throat and lifted him off the floor. I didn't quite know how that happened.
Is it one of those things where you were just watching it and you were like, all right, I get this is supposed to be dramatic. Like, if this was real life and we weren't watching it on the screen, I highly doubt that this is how, Fisk would have just sent a guy over there with a silenced pistol and said, kill this guy, and that would have been that.
Yeah, and the Fisk we know, I mean, one, I don't know, we know that he's violent. He kills that Russian guy, he smashes his head in the door, we know he's capable of that. But I just don't, maybe this is just a trouble I have in general, I don't understand the need to have the villain sit there and sort of dangle his little bit of insight in front of somebody before he decides to try and kill him. It's like every Bond villain, does that monologuing.
Yes.
Before they try and kill Bond, and then it doesn't work. And it's like, even dramatically speaking, I don't understand the incentive for that. It feels like it's just the writer trying to prove that they can be poetic, or that they can be ironically profound or symbolic or metaphoric, and it's like, just tell the story.
Yeah.
Just
seems rare. Yeah.
Yeah, give us action, show us something happening, as opposed to somebody sitting there yakking about it. And there are exceptions to it. There's a scene in season 1 of The Wire where one of the characters is describing how to play chess to a bunch of the kids in the yard, and that conversation is very carefully written, and it's clear that in the show they constantly refer to their drug selling as the game, and so it's very clear that when he describes chess, he's describing the game that they play as drug dealers. And at the same time, he has this insight into what he thinks of each piece on the board. And that builds this beautiful image for how you think of everybody else that you come across. There's nothing like that in Fisk's speech to Ben. He just kind of says, he just takes a couple cheap shots at technology and then chokes him out. It's
Would you have preferred, though? This is just, I don't know, hypothetical, devil's advocate kind of stuff. No pun intended.
Yeah.
That Ben come home from his evening and walk through his front door and immediately walk in and there's a henchman in there who says, Fisk sends his regards, and then just gets choked to death, and like that it ends in 45 seconds there. Like, would that have been any better?
I think so.
Really?
I mean, what did you learn in that scene?
But that would have been anticlimactic.
Not at all. You just killed Ben. We loved Ben, I think what would have been better is if Ben had sat down at his computer to start typing, and at that time, Fisk's men break in through the door. And then maybe he's got half of the article written, and Fisk sits down and reads that article.
Do you think maybe the most important element in that, like, whereas you're focusing on, like Fisk taking jabs at like technology and stuff like that, and maybe they didn't accurately convey this, but do you think it was more so supposed to be conveying, that the one thing you do not mess with above all else are the women in Fisk's life, whether it's what was her name? Vanessa, we said? Was it
Vanessa? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or his mother.
Yeah, exactly. Because that was the one thing that kind of got me, and why I can see every flaw that you pointed out in the scene and everything that he said. I totally get why that doesn't work, and I agree with it. But when the last thing he said before he checked him out was his rage fit with like, because you whatever my mother, and then like that was. Even that, I don't want to call it over dramatic because but
I'll definitely say it's over dramatic.
Yeah, but maybe that was more of the focus, more of the focus than the technology stuff and whatnot. Would you agree with that, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you at least on that point. But if he's that worked up about someone getting to his mother, would he sit there and pontificate about technology, or would he break in and say, "Did you talk to my mother?" And he would beat Ben until he says, "Yeah, I did talk to your mom," and then he kills him. Like, make that his motive and make that clear.
Yeah.
But sitting in a chair in the dark and waiting for Ben to get a shot of scotch down his throat before he sits there and muses about the internet and technology.
Yeah.
No, this is something the show does pretty well, is it develops Fisk as this a child. He's got this sort of arrested development. Every time he gets mad, he just has a tantrum. And the problem is that he's now like 6.5 feet tall and 300 pounds. He's a bull in a china shop when he gets mad. And so it's fine if he wants to have this temper, but once that temper goes off, that's supposed to be like he goes into rage mode. He doesn't think to sit down and converse sweetly with somebody before he kills them.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so to perfect the scene, Fisk would have talked less. I think they still needed to give Ben the chance to, like, Fisk still needed to maybe say, like, does anybody else know about what you did, Because they gave Ben's character that chance, for us to realize that, like, he didn't sell out Karen, which I thought was really cool. It was kind of like that one moment, like, wow, like, what a good guy. Like, he probably knows he's going to die right then and there.
Yeah, well, he's also a reporter. He knows not to give away his source. Yeah. And so he's protecting her kind of like a source.
Yeah. You're right on all the points. I think that ultimately, obviously, like, yeah, you're right. It was the writers just kind of, jerking off a little bit with Fisk's monologue, and then on top of it, it was giving the audience this last moment with Ben. Like, here's this character who by now you hopefully like and realize is a really good guy, and we're gonna kill him. So here's your last 4 minutes with him.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and maybe I need to rewatch the scene, but if it had really focused in on his anger or his rage that somebody got to his mother or that somebody got to Vanessa. And if his focus in his conversation had really been about, if that whole scene had been about, you don't talk to the women in my life, you don't talk to my mother, you keep her out of this. And then if Ben had some sort of great, rejoinder or riposte, or he said like, well, Mrs. What's her name? She was somebody's mother, Yeah. Like, if he had tried to find a way to prove to Fisk that Fisk is this raging hypocrite or just a violent, horrible man, like, that conversation would have been fascinating because Ben is trying to hold his own. Instead, we've just got Ben nodding along as Fisk talks about the internet. And then at the end, he's like, "But you talked to my mom, roar!"
Yeah.
It's like,
The thing that broke my heart about that whole scene, and not even in it, but maybe after it, in kind of like the overall scope of the story that I just felt really bad about, was how, and I thought it was kind of like brilliant, like scenario setup and whatnot, was how Karen tricked Ben into going there, and that's what ended up getting him killed in the end.
Yeah.
That she pulled one over on him, and he paid the price, or they did, or she did. I was just like, damn, not that I wanted her to be the one to go down for it, but at the same time, I was just like, damn.
Yeah, and that's great baggage for her to carry into the next season.
Yeah.
And I think it's after Ben dies that... Oh, goodness. Maybe it's not. I think it's after Ben dies that then Matt and Foggy have their arguments when Foggy discovers that Matt is the devil of Hell's Kitchen. Mm-hmm. And there's this great span of time in the show where Foggy's not talking to Matt, and Karen is feeling disassociated from everybody because she's lost Ben, because she's caught up in all this violence, and I think it's after she kills Wesley.
Oh, we got to talk about that too.
Which is so good.
Yeah, we got to hit on that.
But so she's feeling isolated, she's killed a man, and she can't talk to the only two friends she has. So there's this great period of time in the show where nobody's working, and everybody's suffering terribly, and it's so clear that their miscommunication or lack of communication is only making it worse. Yeah, I really like that part.
Well, before we hit on Karen and Wesley, everybody knows I can't go an entire episode without using the bathroom. So we'll take a short break here. I'll edit it out, and I'll be right back. All right. Are you there?
I am.
All right.
Okay. So let's reorganize the characters description or characters conversation we've been having here. One thing I wanted to talk about was Matt / Daredevil, Devil's Hell Kitchen, whatever. And his sort of ambiguous goals as a vigilante. It's of course obvious that the original writers of the character, was that Stan Lee? Is he a Stan Lee creation? I should know this. I should have looked it up.
For some reason I want to say no.
Okay. Anyway,
while you talk, I'll look it up.
Okay. So it's pretty clear that they deliberately made him a lawyer and a vigilante because it puts himself on both sides of the law. Furthermore, I'm fascinated, and I don't know if this is original canon or not, that he's Catholic, which seems like the hard liquor of Christianity. And so he has two really extreme dogmas that he is supposed to follow as a person in the lit or well-seen world, and yet then at night as a vigilante he sloughs off a great deal of that, and he circumvents the law, and he enacts violence in great quantities on other people. And towards the middle / end of the series, or first season here, he wrestles with the decision to try and kill Fisk. And I think this struggle over murder is... it's not a first for superheroes, because Batman has always gone through this I won't kill, and the Joker taunts him for it.
Right. Yeah.
But I feel like they deal with it in Daredevil, let's say, Drew Goddard and Jeff Loeb, who wrote Hush and Dark Victory and Long Halloween, who's dealt with Batman quite extensively. They deal with it not just on a moral level, but on a spiritual level, and on a personal, emotional level. And it's mostly conversation, but it's a beautiful conversation that they have, that he and his priest have several times, trying to decide whether or not killing a man of great violence and evil will have a negative effect on you, the murderer, even if it has a greater good effect for the community at large.
Yeah.
And I think that's a delicate theme that they deal with pretty delicately, given how blunt the show is as a whole. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that topic.
No, I appreciated the way that they handled it. Also, that, like you said, like the first thing that came into my mind was the whole Batman thing. Also, but even Whereas with Batman, it always seemed like it was like very much an internal struggle and like solely, and not something that was really talked about too much. Almost like a struggle, especially in like the recent like Batman films and stuff like that, just like that everybody knew that he had. I did appreciate seeing him go to, confession and stuff like that. I loved his relationship with the is it the priest or the Catholics say priest? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
In the show and whatnot, and kind of like, yeah, like I've always, I don't know, even in life and stuff like that, I've thought about it from time to time. Like, if I was a superhero, would I be one that just, took out the bad guys, like completely, like, could I kill and stuff like that? And yeah, for as dark as the show was, it was like whenever he knocked somebody off a roof, or whenever he, he got into his encounters like further and further and further down the show, I just kind of like held my breath and I wondered, like, is it going to happen? Is he going to cross that line? And it was...
Yeah, and will he do it deliberately or by accident?
Exactly, yeah. Like when it almost felt like when? Like when is it going to happen? And because, like I said, I don't have extensive comic book knowledge, like going into the show and stuff like that. And I didn't know if Daredevil ultimately, I still don't know if he becomes a character that is okay with killing or not. And so, I don't know. I appreciated it, the way they handled it. How about you?
I definitely liked it. And I'm really interested. And I wish I could remember the passage. I should have looked it up. But there's that passage from the Bible that they discuss at one point, Matt and the priest, where it's the one interpretation makes it sound like that the good man is supposed to take action against evil, and the priest says, yeah, that's one way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, but you can also see it as a like if you do this, essentially if you look into the abyss, it'll look back into you, and so it makes it sound like. There's also a caution to it that if you decide to go down this path, you end up forever down that path, and that's some of the absolutism of the dogma. But it's also interesting that then he's the devil of Hell's Kitchen. Yeah, that people see him as already evil, even if he's been framed for all those explosions and so forth that take place in, is it episode 7, 8? So I think the show, even though maybe it could do so more strongly, it does play very nicely with like the morality of being a hero or a vigilante, and I wish that they had done more to have Matt's legal struggles interfere with Daredevil's, or with Daredevil's with Matt's. I would like to see, and maybe this will happen in season 2, I would like to see him compete with himself on both sides of this fence that he plays. I think that would be fascinating.
Do you think he'll have to now, though? Like, now that, like, Foggy knows and stuff like that, and knows, like, what he's doing, in part of the firm, and then, like, out on the streets, and how they do, how they will contradict, like, it's just, because Foggy knows, will he ever really run into that?
I'm worried that the show will take the easy way out and use Matt's vigilantism as supplement to his lawyer work, his legality.
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas I think it would be much more interesting if they used it, if one was a hindrance to the other in almost all situations. And so he has this instinct to want to go out and kill Fisk. Yeah. Legally speaking, morally speaking, that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
But maybe it solves the problem and maybe it doesn't. So
yeah,
I would like to see those actions affect each other more strongly.
In regards to the legal work that was shown in the show and whatnot, one of the things that I really, really loved, and it was like part Daredevil, part outside of his Daredevilness, was just his superpowers and his hearing and his ability to read heartbeats and stuff like that, and how he can, like, literally know if somebody, standing trial is lying or not, but how just the fact that he knows it doesn't, in the court of law, he can't use that, it doesn't prove anything, and that, he still has to use the judicial system to prove innocent or guilty. And just that as a struggle I thought was kind of fascinating, and how he'd have conversations with Foggy and whatnot, and Foggy would just, kind of like yell at him and just be like, well, you don't know, like, how can you say that and just how it affected their relationship and whatnot. I thought was really interesting, and I hope they do. I wonder how they're going to address that in the future, kind of like Foggy's knowledge of what Matt is capable of and how he does use that in the court of law, but how they can't ever talk about it outside of themselves,
Yeah, and something interesting that they might try to do is if Foggy becomes reliant on Daredevil. You know, if they're stuck in some sort of case, and then Foggy's like, well, you know, it would clean this up real fast, Matt. You know, and if he starts sort of abusing and exploiting that, and then that'll create some good tension between the two characters.
Yeah.
As well as, you know, it'll put into question if you're capable of doing something like this, why don't you? And then they get to have the legal versus moral versus capacity, you know, versus agency arguments. You know, just because I can do it doesn't mean I should. That brings us to Jurassic Park, but so it goes.
Yeah. On a side note, but not super side note, to answer your question, it says here on Wikipedia that Daredevil is a fictional superhero that appears in American comic books published by Marvel, blah, blah, blah. It says the character was created by writer-editor Stan Lee and artist Bill Everett with an unspecified amount of input from Jack Kirby, in that the first issue of Daredevil rather, appeared in Daredevil #1, April 1964.
Wow. I did not know Daredevil was that old.
Yeah.
I guess that was the heyday for Stan Lee, though. I did just read that Stan Lee this year will overtake Steven Spielberg as the most successful, profitable, wealthy producer in the world.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't. I mean, it makes perfect sense. There's like 2 movies that come out every year with Stan Lee's name on them.
Yeah.
Plus all the comic books, plus all the video games and all the TV shows. Like, yeah, he's just rolling in it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's got like, what, 4 minutes to live? It's pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah. Yeah. I love that Stan's still kicking. Like like you're saying, as influential as everything that he's done has, you know, entered like the mainstream and whatnot. You know, let alone people who have been reading his work and his characters and stuff like that for years and years and years. I think it's so cool that he's able to, you know, do his cameos and just get all this, you know, recognition for everything and whatnot. But yeah, he's like 90-ish years old now.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about it. That was 51 years ago.
Yeah. So.
Cool. Yeah. All right, so let's discuss Fisk a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, actually, you know, I'd like to compare both Fisk and Matt and their backgrounds. I think there's a strong father theme between the two of them.
I like their dads were opposites.
Well, their dads were opposites, and I feel like they both come to a similar place, though. It's clear that both of them want to, quote unquote, clean up the city. Right? Matt becomes a lawyer / vigilante, and Fisk becomes a corporate entrepreneur / drug dealer villain. Right?
Yeah.
And so they come from very different places, and they end up in very different places, and yet they're sort of two sides of the same coin. And in line with Matt's ambiguity in terms of his goals as a hero, because what does he really think he's going to do running around punching people in the alley? He's obviously going to interrupt the flow of Fisk's plan, but you know, will one Daredevil ever be enough to really take that down?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Fisk has this massive empire, and he clearly has the influence. But what I don't understand is, you know, does Matt really think he'll be able to clean it up like any other superhero? Or Batman is the one that's always at the top of my list. Will one vigilante be able to do anything? And at what point do you decide that your work is done? Whereas Fisk, I don't even know what his plan is. He's going to buy up all the tenements and burn them down and put up expensive housing? You know, I don't know what his plan is. He's just buying Hell's Kitchen, essentially. But what I find interesting is that Matt has a father who is a boxer. And he's a dirty boxer. He throws fights for money. He's a good boxer. He's also an idiot. Matt says his dad wasn't bright, but that he was a good boxer. But one thing that his dad has is he's a very compassionate man. Yeah. You know, if I were to tell you that a dumb boxer who throws fights for a living, who's also like violent and whatnot, ended up with a son who was blind and a wife who was dead, do you think he would be a good father to that son? You know, like instinctual, emotional addition here says no, he's going to be a bad father. Right. But instead, he's a great father.
Yeah.
You know, he encourages his kid to read. He encourages him to go to school, to be clean. He teaches him how to stitch him up after a fight. He teaches him all these great moral lessons. And then you've got Fisk, whose father is sort of a deadbeat, but he wants to be somebody, and he wants to get into politics, and he wants to be important, and he wants to teach his kid about respect. But the first thing that he says about the advantage to being on the city council is that once you get there, everybody's going to want to pay you. You know, so he wants to be in the limelight. He wants to be the big shot, and he really wants to be a corrupt politician. It's so funny, and you know, the means to that end he shows Fisk is violence. You know, when that one kid is caught knocking down his father's signs, and Fisk, the kid, stands up to that other kid, gets the crap kicked out of him. Fisk's dad then goes down with his kid, brings him over to the bully, confronts the bully, beats the crap out of the bully, and then tells Fisk to beat the crap out of the bully. He's breeding in this angry, emotional violence into his kid.
Yeah.
Whereas Matt is taught not to use it. He didn't want his kid to be a boxer. He didn't want him to be a fighter at all.
Maybe Fisk's character was so confusing, like his adult character, just because from his childhood he had these two opposite, you know, personality. His mom and his dad were they couldn't be more different, and each one of them is talking in, you know, like one of his ears, and all the information's going in and just getting split and crossed with itself. And I don't know. I'm trying to defend why Fisk's character is he confusing or is he complicated?
I think that this is going to be obnoxious. I think the heart of the character is complicated. Okay. They've given him a backstory that puts him in an emotionally vulnerable but financially and publicly facing strong position. And he doesn't know how to handle that. Now, what I don't understand is what he actually intends to do. He's running heroin. He's bringing in heroin from, I think, the Chinese, and he's running it through the Russians onto the streets. But his goal is to buy up Hell's Kitchen and, quote unquote, clean up this city. Mm-hmm. And that's all he ever says of his plot, right? I mean, did I miss where he says, "Oh, I'm going to tear down these houses and I'm going to put up affordable housing that's clean and safe"? Does he say that at any point? Does he say he's going to burn it down and put up parks? Does it say he's going to strike it down? And I don't know what, it's like that South Park episode. Phase 1, collect underpants. Phase 2, phase 3, profit. I don't understand what his next step is supposed to be.
I don't even think he knows. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, go ahead.
Are you sure? I was going to say see the one thing. For as terrifying as he can be, as far as like his brutality goes and what he's capable of and whatnot, I always felt like one thing that was holding him back this entire season, from even recognizing his own true objectives, was the fact that he was afraid. For as powerful as he was still afraid of the Chinese and the Japanese, not the Russians so much, but the Chinese woman and the Japanese, it seems like their power terrified him. Like they weren't even Steven with him. It was like he was dealing with forces that were very much beyond his control and very much could, probably shut him down if he wasn't careful. And while they're still floating around out there, it almost felt like he needed to get rid of them, which is, what he spent a good half of the season doing before he could really focus on, like we're admitting, whatever it is that he thinks he's trying to do, which maybe he didn't even really know. I felt like for as much as we knew about his character and his character's history and backstory and whatnot, I was still like, well, like, how did he get all this money? How did he end up in such a position of power with nobody knowing his name? It was like, I really wish that we got to know the genesis of Fisk the adult, more so from, like, not just that little bit of childhood, but I wish we could have seen him maybe in his 20s or something like that, because it almost seemed like some of those answers lying with his mother and stuff like that. Almost like they talk about her remarrying a couple of times, and I almost wondered if some of the wealth that he acquired wasn't from somebody that she married and divorced, or married and who knows what happened to them, and there was like for some reason he covered her up and stuff like that, and I wondered if that's where some of his wealth came from. He is still very much a mystery to me.
Yeah, and I think at the end of 13 hours, we should have had a little bit more insight to him.
Yeah. Would you agree, though, that he was very much afraid, despite all the power he had? He was still kind of cowering in his adult boots also?
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's justified. I think it's really clear that he puts on a tough face, and the second something doesn't go his way, he turns back into that child.
Yeah.
And he throws a fit, and he throws a tantrum, and he gets overtly violent. He kills that Russian guy. He keeps telling people to go out and kill Daredevil. He keeps, he kills Ben literally with his bare hands.
Yeah.
And he, how many times does he beats that one lackey of his, and then the other guy even asks him, he's like, are you sure you can trust him after that beating? And yeah. It's one thing to follow someone who's a horrible person. It's another to follow someone who's horrible to you. And so, yeah, I think he is afraid, but I think he's got that childish fear where it's not that he's always worried that something over his head is going to drop, but it's if he's in a situation and somebody doesn't agree, he gets furious.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things about him also was, despite from a very early age acknowledging the fact that his dad was a piece of crud, he's still, despite ending that relationship and whatnot, is just becoming his father, just like a man who is ruling through fear, So it's almost like he is, with everything else he's dealing with, he is becoming the thing he hates or hated, very quickly, if he's not already there.
Yeah, I'm probably talking out of turn here, but it almost seems Oedipal, because he kills his father and he doesn't then, have sex with his mom, but he does look after her very closely.
Yeah.
He secrets her away, and she becomes his, in the same way that Vanessa is his. He tries to possess people. He's the sort of person who buys affection. He treats Vanessa to that meal at a restaurant with just them. He buys out the whole restaurant for the evening.
Yeah.
He's the sort of guy who it's almost like Charles Foster Kane from Citizen Kane, where he's a guy who will buy your affection because that's the only way he knows how. He can't actually show it himself.
Yeah. Would you say, though, that despite everything that they might have, stumbled through in creating, like, Fisk's character and making him dynamic and stuff like that, would you say, well, you know what? Okay. My brain's going in two directions. In one hand, I was going to try to get you to, assess whether or not you felt like they did a better job with Fisk than is normally, done with, like, creating dynamic villains and stuff like that. But then I immediately remembered that we're talking about a character that was built up over a 13-hour-long season versus, say, like a 2-hour movie. And so in which case we have to compare him to other villains that are built up over 13 hours.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's tough to say. And honestly, even though they have a lot of those pieces, I feel like there's still something missing. Like we said, we don't know how he came into power. We still don't know what his actual plan is. And there are some of those are major pieces of his character that I think we need. Part of what also bothers me is the performance. I'm really bored and irritated by Vincent D'Onofrio's performance.
Oh, okay.
I think he's a really wacky performer, and I know he can do well. He was Edgar in Men in Black. He can do weird.
What character is that?
He's the Bug. He's
really?
The villain he's the villain in Men in Black.
Oh my god!
Right? So he can do weird, but this performance of Fisk feels like there's another actor that he swallowed who's trying to prevent performing. He does these weird head movements. He's doing this really standard, overused, boring, low grumble for all of his dialogue.
Part of him was still the Bug. He can't let go of the bug.
Part of him was still the Bug. He actually swallowed the guy who swallowed the bug.
Oh no, Inception again, Scott.
I just read Frankenstein yesterday, and there was a point in that book where it becomes a story of a guy on a boat telling a story about a guy in a sled telling a story about the monster who's telling a story about a bunch of cottagers that he meets in the woods.
Yeah.
It's insane.
And somewhere a parallel universe has just imploded upon itself as you recognize that.
Yep, something popped right out of existence. I'm doing the world a favor. So yeah, I'm really turned off by his performance, in part because it's not dynamic. There's no subtlety to the performance. He's either a grumbling, I'm so cool corporate villain, or he's flipping over tables and screaming like a child.
Yeah.
There's not much delicacy to the performance or to like the scene-by-scene motivations for his character. And, you know, even though we have a good backstory and we have explosive demonstrations of the effect that it's had on him, I still don't know anything about him. I couldn't tell you how I expect him to act in the next scene, and because I don't know his evil plan, I don't know what he plans to do next. So this kind of leads me to one of my problems with the story in general, is that one way to break it down is that it's what's called an and then plot instead of like a therefore plot or a but plot. And a but plot sounds dirty, but the idea is that if you can describe your plot by saying, here's plot point 1, and then plot point 2, and then plot point 3, but you can't say, here's plot point 1, therefore plot point 2, or but plot point 3, you have what's called an and then plot, which is just a series of events loosely linked, whereas the therefore or but stories have all of the action in the story linked to each other, and one action in the next plot point is a result of the last. And even though there are light links here and there in Daredevil, they're not very strong. And so things tend to come out of the blue, or they get explained after the fact. And so I feel like there are so many scenes, and I think honestly some of that monologuing I was talking about earlier, where Fisk is just sitting there talking about the internet, I feel like that is the result of a writer who didn't write the scene ahead of time. And I'm being really, really speculative and sort of elitist here, but the idea is that if you understand your character's motivations before you write the scene, you will have that motivation in mind throughout the entire scene. One thing that they teach you in acting class is to find the game. Find out what your character wants and find a way to get it, not just through the dialogue, but through your action in the scene. And if your writer doesn't know the game, then they're not writing motivation.
Yeah.
And so what you end up with is you end up with the setup, here's a dramatic setup, and then the end goes, oh, and it was all for this reason. Done. And so there's this big chunk in the middle that's just fat and you know, hammy, but isn't substantive.
Do you think that... Okay, so then D'Onofrio, so he's handed this script with this character, and he reads it, and he's like, oh, man, okay, so I had a really rough childhood, and I'm half a monster now because of it, and you know, like, okay, and I want to clean up the city. So he's like, you know, I am the kingpin. Yep. It's almost like, yeah, it sounds like he needed to be handed, like you were saying, something that was written by a better writer, or a writer that took more time to flesh out this character. It almost sounds like he did the best he could with what he had.
Right, or a director who understood it better.
Yeah, in that I wonder if it would have been better for the writers and directors and everybody on board to kind of, you know, like we're saying, we have source material here that dates back to the, you know, 1960s, in which, you know, according to Wikipedia here, you know, it says that, you know, Bullseye and Kingpin were both kind of primary enemies that Daredevil fought, you know, throughout the, you know, the issues and whatnot, and there had to have been more there that they could have, you know, sourced from and whatnot. Hopefully Daredevil, or I mean, you know, Fisk/Kingpin in the comic books becomes more than, you know, cleaning up this city with drugs and selling property to the Japanese, and look at this city, it's so clean, come, you know, fight me, you know. Hopefully it's more than that, unless it's not, and therefore the whole, you know, I was going to say, kind of piggybacking, kind of going back a little bit, that despite all of these things that are wrong with Fisk's character, which I completely and utterly agree with, all the points and the confusions and everything that you've brought up, some of the moments that still hit home for me is, I don't know if they're more shallow or stuff like that, but it's kind of, you know, when he goes through the process of, you know, meeting Vanessa and buying that painting as white and confusing as it could be, and then when it leads back to him staring at the wall in his timeouts as a kid, and kind of like them drawing those parallels and stuff like that. I thought that all of that was incredibly powerful, and And despite that, it's still confusing. But they did do some really cool things like that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That was something I had written down and forgotten. I haven't really been looking at my extra notes here, so
okay.
So I'm really glad you brought that up because I think it's a great idea to have a villain who has this weak point, specifically for it's cool if it's a romantic interest, right? That he's this horrible, violent villain, and yet he's this like shaky-handed teenager trying to ask a girl out.
Yeah.
And specifically, with that big white painting that he buys, rabbit in a snowstorm. It's not actually what it's called, but it's their joke for it. I think not only is that like a beautiful sort of treatise on art and how art doesn't necessarily have to be doesn't have to have a message, and it doesn't have to necessarily present you with a profound image, but it can be a piece for meditation.
Yes.
It can be something that you reflect on and you let yourself project yourself onto the piece of art. There are things, tankas in Buddhism are specifically meant to just meditate upon to help you achieve enlightenment. The images themselves are, of course, serene and so forth, but the idea is not that the image itself brings you to a definite conclusion, but that it facilitates your thinking. And so when Fisk buys this, textured white canvas, essentially, and uses it to reflect on his childhood because it reminds him of the wall that his father used to make him stop and stare at when he was in trouble or just mad. That's a beautiful trigger. It's a beautiful device to use inside a TV show.
Yeah.
Specifically a superhero show, where so many superhero movies or comic books have this definite justice or some sort of moral message. This is saying just let yourself reflect on it. And that's not only different compared to the rest of the genre, but I think that's a profound statement regarding art and regarding this character, that he, if you take away the external irritation from Fisk, he will just sit there and stare at the wall.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just a reactionary.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't have an end goal because he's just constantly fighting against someone. He doesn't have a plan. He's just trying to take power away from people. And he therefore accumulates himself as he goes along.
Yeah. Yeah, you're nailing on a lot of things. It's almost like ultimately, it's for everything they gave us in regards to his character, they force us to fill in the holes, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
They don't ask us to. They just expect us to, or they don't. And again, because the writers weren't doing their jobs as much as they could have or should have, maybe necessarily in like the 13 hours that, they developed him and whatnot. To me, it almost felt like in regards to the painting and stuff like that, it was like they, like you were saying, they nailed this one massively deep idea or concept and they gave to him. Mm-hmm. And D'Onofrio probably loved it also because it's not something that you always see in regards to villains and stuff like that. And so he might have looked at that and just been like, wow, deep villain. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Will act in.
Yeah. And then he looks at the rest of the script and he goes, wait a minute, guys.
Yeah. It's like, yeah. Unfortunately, the writer stopped there. No offense. Like, we're not trying to.
Yeah, we just want more. It seems like there are a lot of great ideas here in Daredevil, and they don't follow through all the way.
Yeah.
So for season 2, follow through, because there's good stuff here.
Yeah. Since we're talking about Fisk, do you want to, should we talk about the way his arc ends and where he ends up and stuff like that? Like to go with the end of him. It's like we can obviously go back and talk about other people more. It was for as much as I loved the last episode and I felt like the final battle between Daredevil and Fisk was, fan service and stuff like that. There was a part of me that just almost wanted him to still, despite it all, end up back in his ivory tower because it just, I don't know. It was almost like they hadn't done enough with him for him to, justifiably end up in prison. I mean, obviously, he's a bad guy and stuff like that, and he ended up in prison, but I almost felt like, no. Why? Not yet. We don't know anything about him.
Yeah, there's a point in that fight where he's screaming at Daredevil, and he's like, "You took her away from me! You took everything away from me!" And I went, "Did he?" I mean, and the more I thought about it, he definitely interrupted his Daredevil definitely interrupted Fisk's crusade or his whatever plot, but took it away. No, she's still waiting for him. He still has plenty of money, and even if the heroin trade is interrupted, he still has. And I don't even know what happened with the human trafficking part of his story. That feels like it disappeared after the second episode.
Yeah.
But I don't have the sense that his empire or his ivory tower has crumbled. And I feel like he could still bounce back pretty easily. In fact, he almost did, because he had all those cops who took him away from the regular cops.
Yeah.
And like he still seemed like he was in pretty good shape.
There was that moment in the armored car where obviously the way it was filmed and the way they were trying to build up suspense and stuff like that, something was going to happen. And like when the FBI first showed up during that like montage of everybody getting arrested, I kind of had that moment where I was just like, yeah, the FBI, you can't touch them, when the one agent in the car ends up like, oh, okay, so the FBI has been infiltrated also. I had that moment where I felt like, wow, like in that moment when the FBI guy shoots the other guy, you realize like, wow, Fisk's his puppet strings and his finances and stuff like that go deep into like the government level. So it was almost like they were showing you this guy's even more powerful than you ever knew, and it goes past the department of like Hell's Kitchen and stuff like that. It was kind of like a holy crap moment, and then the end when he's sitting in front of the prison, when he's in his prison stall. I don't know if you call them stalls. Cell. There you go. Cell. Thank you. And he's sitting there on his bed and he's staring at the wall, and once again the wall looks like the wall from his childhood / the painting, and it was kind of like they make you do that, like, whoa, deep, like you're saying, like if you once you strip away the painting, so many parts of it begin to crumble once again.
Yeah,
it's that damn painting. It was
yeah. It's a good idea, but we need more to it.
Yeah,
keep using it, keep twisting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to expect for the second season. Is it going to be him trying to get out of jail? Is he going to start pulling the strings from there? Are they going to introduce a new villain? I don't know. Well,
yeah, I don't know. He'll get out. He's got money. That was the thing that was really, I don't know if interesting is the right word, with his character and his power and stuff like that. I was just like, wow, all of this world, this Hell's Kitchen, that was one of the things that was really interesting to me, was how, like Daredevil and, his version of cleaning up in the city, and how maybe necessary it was. It was like things were so horrible just because of money, because Fisk had so much money, and the cops want money, and the politicians want money. It was like if we weren't such a capitalist society and everything couldn't be bad, things might not be so bad. It was so frustrating that, like Foggy wanted to use the judicial system to solve all the problems, and get their firm on its feet and stuff like that. But at its core, it was just like everything was so ridiculously corrupt that it did seem, in the grand scheme of Hell's Kitchen in this series and stuff like that a vigilante like Daredevil was the only answer, because freaking Fisk has who knows how much money. It's just like, it blew my mind, and it frustrated me in a good way, that like I couldn't have rooted for Murdoch's character more, because I was like, yes, just start hitting people, because there's nothing else.
There's no other way out.
Yeah.
And that's actually a strong theme that runs throughout the rest of the show, this sort of goodwill versus profit thing. Nelson and Murdoch, that agency, they don't charge anybody for the services that they render to Mrs. Cardenas or to Karen.
Yeah.
They're doing it in part for reputation, but also because they believe that's the good thing for them to do. Similarly, Claire, who tends to Matt Murdoch's injuries, doesn't charge him. Her job is a nurse. Karen works for free, or at least until they actually start getting paid. Whereas everything that Fisk does is motivated by profit.
Yeah.
And everyone that he works with is motivated by profit. The sort of wild card there is Vanessa, and I really can't make sense of her. Because at first she's put off by feeling as though she's at risk by being around him. Mm-hmm. And then she brings a gun to dinner.
Yeah.
And I guess he senses that she has it because he doesn't go through her purse, or we're not shown that he goes through her purse, but he guesses that she's got a gun. And then she's cool with it. And then suddenly she's totally on his side, and she's willing to stand by him through whatever, even, if that means being poisoned or blown up or whatever. So I don't understand her motivation. I was kind of hoping that once I saw her side with Fisk, that maybe she would turn out to be even more evil than him. That maybe somehow she's excited by the adrenaline that comes with being a corrupt, horrible human being, and that she would then start to whisper into his ear, no, these people are traitors, things like that would have been really fascinating for me. But again, we're not given enough from her perspective. I have no idea what she sees in him. Yeah. Obviously, at first he intimidates her, he scares her, so she brings a gun, and then all of a sudden she's like this stoic pillar of affection and support on his behalf. I don't know where that came from.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say everything that you said layered in with the idea that, just from her job's point of view, that she's this woman that works. Her position as I don't know what it was. She was maybe the head of the gallery, or maybe a salesperson there. Yeah, whatever. And so day in and day out, it sounds like she's. Because she's gorgeous, she's confronted with men always wanting to buy her things and take her out and flaunt their money and stuff like that. And here comes Fisk, this guy who recognizes that and says, "Okay, you can't be bought. You can't be bought. I wasn't trying to buy you anyways." And so I understand her being attracted by that. You know, despite the fact that he's potentially as powerful and financially well off as any other man that she's ever met.
Yeah, and despite the fact that is actually what he's doing.
yeah, exactly. He just went about it backwards.
Yeah.
I think in the end, unfortunately, we might be able to write her off as a fairly shallow character.
Yeah, that might be the case.
Yeah.
Even though again, like everything else, there are good ideas there.
Yeah, totally.
We just don't see the conclusion of those ideas. We don't see them enacted or conflicted or set against someone else's ideals.
Yeah. Throughout the whole series, Gina and I just said, why does she like him? Why?
Yeah, no idea.
Yeah, I presented the idea of everybody else had power, blah, 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 and he blind. It was weird.
Yeah, it is.
But also, they didn't let us into her backstory or anything like that. We don't know anything about the kind of woman she was before we first meet her, and we never learn anything about the kind of woman she was or is.
Yeah.
Other than he cares about her, that's...
Yeah, and that comes because, she sold him a painting? I don't know.
Yeah, she was more so just there as just sort of like this catalyst to justify some of his rage.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, she's something for him to get angry about.
Mm-hmm. Huh. Where do we go from there? Can we talk about... We don't have to spend a lot of time on Claire, but Claire, like you're saying, nurse, stitches up Murdoch / Daredevil. Did you find it interesting that they chose to not go the full-on romantic route with her and him, that they dabbled into it, they alluded to the potential for it, but that ultimately nothing came of it? And I guess I'm okay with it, but I like Rosario Dawson as... I don't know. I liked her character in the film. I kind of like her as an actress. And I really wish that we would have seen more of her from the end, but at the same time, I appreciated that they didn't take the stereotypical route with their relationship.
Yeah, I think it's funny that Rosario Dawson has probably the biggest name in the show, and she's in, 4 episodes?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, that's confusing to me. I'm also confused because I don't feel like... One, that their romance built to a point, and then I feel like it disappeared very quickly. Mm-hmm. I'm fine if maybe they decided, that it would be perhaps either a conflict of interest or it would be too much at stake, emotionally speaking. But I feel like it came out of nowhere and it disappeared just as quickly, and I was kind of bothered by it. I like I don't mind that it was quick, and I certainly don't mind that they took away his romantic interest. That's something that Foggy says happens anyway. Like he only has like these month-long flings with women, and then something happens, right? So that's an interesting character trait, because he otherwise seems very appealing. You know, attractive guy, smart, on the way to being successful, you know, in shape and all that fun stuff, and seemingly good morals, at least on the outside and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting that he has all these relationships that just fall flat on their face, and that's a cool character trait. Also interesting that as a hero, he can save people, but he can't be close to other people necessarily.
Yeah.
You know, so there are some things in there that are worth paying attention to and worth juggling. But yeah, I don't quite understand what happened, and I don't know why she's not in the show more.
Yeah,
you know, she seems. It seems weird to have hired someone like Rosario Dawson to play like a third string character if they're not going to keep her around, or at least keep her storyline relevant. I felt like Ben's story had more relevance, and he was present in many more episodes than Claire was. And it's not that like we should be gauging the quality of the character by the star that they hire to play the character.
Right.
But it was just weird.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, she does say at a certain point, I can't fall in love with somebody that does what you do for a living, and I'm not obviously talking about your law firm and stuff like that. And he sort of says like, yeah, okay,
yeah, and then that's that.
I get it.
Yeah, it reminds me of the conversation from Unbreakable, where Robin Wright, I can't remember her character's name, is talking to Julius, Mr. Glass, in physical therapy, and she's talking about what attracted what she was attracted to in David, when normally she hates athletes because she's a physical therapist. She sees the damage that they do to their bodies, and she doesn't like it. But there was something about David, and she admires his skill. And then he also agreed to not play anymore, and he faked his injury, and he's been miserable ever since. That's a fantastic conversation. But there's nothing like that here. There's no option to quit. There's no option to make it to her liking. There's no option for her to adapt. It's just, wait, you wouldn't like someone like me? Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I'm not sure that there's a long-lasting consequence there, and so I don't know why it was brought up.
It was almost,
and it's not like he's cycling through women constantly either. It's not like every episode there's some other girl he's going out with, and like that might have been interesting too. Where if this Daredevil thing keeps getting in the way, but it's just one.
Yeah. To me, it almost felt like, from a writing point of view, like they were dabbling in too much of kind of too much cliche territory, and somebody caught it at a certain point. And somebody's like, no, we're not going to do that. Almost like when Gina and I were watching it, she even felt like at the point at which they kiss was unwarranted or kind of like out of nowhere. And I kind of joked that like, hey, there's only so many times you can stitch up a guy before you just kind of get to that point where you're like, all right, stitch you up 2 or 3 times, time to romance, buddy. But like I said, cliche.
She even says that she likes the opportunity to see him with his shirt off.
Yeah,
which is funny, and it's kind of cool. She's clearly attracted to him. What I would like, here I think is something that I did think when it first happened, but like I would like them to be romantically interested in each other, but know that they can't go through with it because they can't stand the emotional strain that it would put on them.
But even then, are we tiptoeing into cliche superhero territory? I mean, it just seemed like
love story is going to be cliche, I think, up and down.
Because it's just that, yeah.
I think it's fine to use. No matter what you do, you're going to end up using something that somebody else has used before. It's how well you use it, and maybe given the strength of the series and the rest of its ideas, it could have pulled along something like that, And she's not just some dopey girl who really wants to be with him. She's not like Lois Lane, and she's not. That was another good example here. whatever. She's not just some dopey girl that's getting caught up in the violence and whatnot. Like she's in the dirt with him, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so it might have worked. Maybe better writers would have been needed, or maybe more time or more patience with the material. But we don't have it one way or another.
Yeah, maybe it was just maybe they just didn't do a good job of conveying the idea that she survived everything with the Russians because the Russians got wiped out, and that it just would have been stupid for him and her to put themselves in that caliber of a oh crap moment, you're gonna die because of what I do type of thing again, that they were like yeah, we're done dating and stuff like that because very clearly too dangerous and the Russians are gone, but there's all sorts of other nationalities in Hell's Kitchen that'll want to kill you sooner or later.
Yeah, there's that weird moment where she's tied up and they've been brutalizing her, and she's clearly terrified. She seems to be like on the verge of giving in some respect. And then Daredevil sort of shows up, like the people start disappearing and whatnot. And they're like, what's that? And she starts laughing, and then suddenly she's in a good mood again. Like, no, I think she would stay pretty terrified even if suddenly she feels better about the situation. Like, she's still been beaten, and she's still been snatched out of her home or wherever it was. Like, she's been abducted, and she's been beaten. Like, even if she has a hero coming to save her, like, there's a certain amount of doubt no matter what.
Yeah.
But no, she's suddenly taunting the bad guys.
She was, definitely a knock against the character and against the scene, but like again, in this being a little bit smarter than typical superhero-y kind of stuff. One of the things that I remember really appreciating in that scene in particular was how, like, okay, so the fighting breaks out and the firefight starts and stuff like that. Like, at least she was trying to escape. She was curled up into a ball, trying not to get hit by bullets, and it was like, yes, there's fighting going on, and they're showing you trying to get away, not just like sitting there for your knight in shining armor to sweep you up off your feet. Like, she was very much concerned about her own survivability or whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So speaking of survivability, and I don't want to force us to segue here, but I just want to make sure that we do not forget about Karen and Wesley.
Well, let's just do that now then.
Yeah.
I don't have too much more to say about Claire because she's not in it much.
Yeah.
That's another scene where I'm really glad with the way it came out.
Mm-hmm.
But man, was I bored while that scene was taking place. It was like each one of them was just sitting there trying to prove to the other how big and impressive they were. And all that dialogue was just, do you really think I do this? Oh yeah, well, do you really think I do that? I was like, come on.
Was there that part of you, therefore, that was just kind of like, thank you, when she finally just tells him to shut up and kill her? Just like, shut up. Like, I get what this is. You're the bad guy, and we're doing this thing that bad guys do for whatever reason, at least in movies. And she told him to shut up, and I was like, yes, dude, shut up, kill her.
Yeah, just something happened, please.
Yeah.
But that was a scene that built nicely. He discovers that somebody got to Fisk's mom, knowing that would set off Fisk at a time when Vanessa was endangered already. Wesley decides to go take care of it himself. But I have no idea. She says, are you going to kill me? He goes, no, I'm going to offer you a job. We have no idea what that job was going to be, do we?
No, I don't think so.
I have no... it's a great twist. It's a great twist to say, no, we're not going to kill you. I have an opportunity for you. If we had heard just a little bit about that, that might have helped me a bit. But instead, it was just like this. It was just a writerly thing to do where you just turn the drama on the character without necessarily any motivation or any reason. You're just saying, nope, you're wrong, and we're going to shock you. It's just like we're going to try and blow the audience's mind, but we don't have any substance behind it. So it was really bugging me. And then she picks up the gun, and he goes, do you really think I'd put a loaded gun on the table in front of you? And I thought, God, I hope the answer is yes. I was like, please kill him. Because it would be so annoying if he got away, or what person would put an unloaded gun on the table? Like, in his situation, is there any advantage to not having a loaded gun? Like, that would not have made any sense. So I was so glad that it was a loaded gun, and she didn't even outsmart him. She just got to it first,
Yeah.
And then she has the courage, courage, and call it whatever you want. Then she kills a man, which is something that Matt has been fretting about the entire series, right?
Yeah.
It's something he can't bring himself to do, and Karen, the most unlikely of them all, does it.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's what I loved.
And then the thing that's really interesting, I thought, in that scene is in that moment right before what did she say? She said something like, "Do you really think this is the first time I've killed somebody or shot a gun?" I forget what the line is. And then we learn in that moment that thing, that baggage that's hanging over her head the whole time, the dirt people have on her that we never quite know what it is, has something to do with the murder she's committed at some point, in her life previously. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, that becomes something that she carries with her, and that's great. Yeah, and I think it's her alienation, that whole sequence I was talking about earlier, comes after she kills Wesley, where she's like, when Matt and Foggy aren't talking to each other, and she comes into the office, and she's like, she really needs somebody to talk to, and suddenly her two friends aren't there. Like, that's the writers perfectly twisting the knife in her wound, She's just experienced something terrible and something morally disruptive, and she can't release it to anybody.
Yeah.
Like, that's a beautiful thing for her to have to carry. It's terrifying.
I was telling Gina also after that scene that one of the things that I love that they did with Wesley's character was like, okay, so that's the way that he goes out. I was really happy, though, that he didn't get some, like, generic henchman death. Not that they would have ever done that with him, or that, like, Daredevil didn't do it. That it was, like, ultimately that one thing that he slipped up on, and the one thing that did him in, had to do with his unwavering commitment and loyalty to Fisk, in that, like, phone rings, pick it up, that second. You don't even flinch. And the fact that he was just like, ooh, phone rang, and he just went for it. It was like that one little thing, that one quality or trait that he exhibited the whole series was ultimately what did him in the end.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I'm just trying to put that then, like, in light of the rest of the show. Like, in terms of what loyalty means.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting.
After that, I was wondering how bad, Fisk was just going to freak out once he learned about it. It was like Wesley and Vanessa all in one fell swoop, and then his mom layered in with their, the drama with that, and just how much of a monster he was going to become from all three of those elements just piled on top of, on top of each other, one after another.
Yeah, and I like that it didn't learn about it right away either. Like, Wesley was missing for a while.
Yeah, it was just like, which one of our hidden locations do we? It was only a matter of time before they found him, but I just thought it was funny that they were going to have to search through each one of those little safe housey torture areas that they had.
Yeah.
One thing, speaking of like we were saying, like Fisk and Wesley and the whole like plot and stuff like that, we never really did learn like what he was hoping to gain by giving like land to the Japanese in that series, or what they were going to do with having houses and stuff like that, or what they were going to push. Like, there was a lot of ambiguous stuff with that also. Just kind of like, okay, the Japanese moving in wasn't good. We didn't know why they cared, or why it was important, or why Fisk was.
Yeah, or why it was totally fine for ninja Japanese gangster to die at the hands of Daredevil. Like, it seemed like there were so many aspects of Fisk's plan that he just put up as straw dogs, and we have no idea what is actually at stake. So it's impossible to follow.
Yeah. But do you know the actor who plays Wesley? Did you know him from anything else? Because the one thing that I couldn't just get out of my head was, speaking of how, like, when Fisk would do, like, the grumbly voice, how it was, like, super annoying and stuff like that, the man that plays Wesley, I absolutely loved his voice. I think just, like, looking at him, he's kind of, like, clean-shaven and nice hair and the suit and the glasses and stuff like that, and whenever he talked, it was really deep, and I was just like, that guy sounds awesome. I hope he gets voiceover work and stuff like that, too, because it was just like, I didn't see it coming. It always surprised me.
I don't know him. His name is Toby Leonard Moore. Yeah,
whereas like Fisk, like you're saying, whenever he talked and whenever he was angry, it sounded like he was trying to push out a crap or something.
It was ridiculous. I don't. It's almost as puzzling as Eddie Redmayne's performance in Jupiter Ascending. Like, it's just such weird decision making in terms of actor performance.
Yeah,
it's like, I don't know why you would choose to be so twitchy and so unnaturally grumbly.
Yeah,
I don't think that's his real voice. It's very strange.
I say one of the interesting choices I thought, like comparing Affleck's Daredevil, the film that is, to this series, what in D'Onofrio as Fisk / Kingpin, was that this time it was like almost like they went for looks. Like they chose this white dude who would look, when bald, because obviously even in D'Onofrio's picture here on IMDb, he's got a beard and hair and stuff like that, but just like he looks like Kingpin looks in the comic books. Obviously, in the comic books, the Kingpin's huge. He's like a massive elephant-sized character for the most part. I don't know if he's always drawn that way, but I always thought that in Affleck's Daredevil film that it was interesting that they chose Michael Clark Duncan, who's now obviously since passed away. And I remember at the time watching the bonus features from either the director or the producers of that film, and they said, in choosing African-American Kingpin character, it was like they did have to make the decision between, getting a Caucasian actor to do it and, having it look like people knew Kingpin from the comic books and whatnot, or do you get, the biggest guy in Hollywood right now, which at the time was like Duncan, and that's what they went with. And I always thought like, okay, I could see how something like that might tick off like comic book fans, but I thought it was just interesting having to make these decisions, from a production standpoint. And here we have D'Onofrio, and they chose like, we're going to go with the, guy that when he's bald looks like Kingpin in the comic books, like comic book fans, know their Kingpin to be and stuff like that. But sort of one of the areas where the trade-off had to be was like maybe not the best choice as far as
in terms of performance.
Yeah. But I don't know.
And I think Vincent D'Onofrio is a good performer. I just think he needs a stronger director in this case because he's doing something really strange. And he just needs direction, I think, to tone it down and to reel it in.
Yeah. I mean, while we're still talking about characters and stuff like that, do you want to talk more about like Foggy a little bit? And
yeah, let's do it. We don't know too much about Foggy or his backstory, but it gets revealed very slowly that he has a connection with that girl Marcy, who's at that competing law firm, the one that represents Fisk.
Yeah.
That's actually something I really like about his character, that he's not the leading man look, I'm not going to say that he's ugly or anything like that, but he's not like, he doesn't have the strong jawline or the slick features. He's got kind of long hair. He's a little sloppy looking.
Just like, but as a person in life.
Yeah. He's got this like on again, off again thing with some really hot girl at a competing law firm. It's cool that they didn't undermine him as this completely inept nerd.
Yes. Yeah.
They gave him a little bit of dance room in terms of his character. That he's funny, he's charming, he's kind of hard to get along with, even though he is those things, and he plays the line on their on the morality scale too, in terms of let's just be lawyers to make money versus let's do the right thing as lawyers.
Yeah.
And he sometimes does that in between lines of dialogue, even. But it's cool. He's got some good bounce. I feel like he could embrace his character's jokiness a little bit more. I feel like sometimes he just sort of the actor himself sort of just like runs through his jokes instead of delivering them and trying to sell them. But
yeah, were you at all like? Did you feel anything for almost like the indirect love triangle that he was ending up in, where he's got this thing for Karen, and Karen, I don't know if it was obvious. It was like this half obvious, half subtle, if that can make any sense possibly.
Sure.
Thing where she was, like falling for Murdoch and stuff like that, and it was just like, but Murdoch, I don't know, it was like Murdoch was oblivious of Karen, who wasn't oblivious of Nelson, who, it was just like this weird thing, and it was like, I felt bad for like Nelson's character. I was like, Murdoch, you blind bastard, like Foggy could never catch a break, never.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Murdoch's fault, the whole Karen thing, and I was just like, darn it, Nelson doesn't know that, like, I don't know, it just seemed like Karen obviously, like, the whole thing was messy, and I was just like, I felt bad for him.
No, it's something I wanted more of. Yeah, because there does seem to be sort of a triangle developing there, and Foggy's got all this charm, and he takes her out, and he's not overtly hitting on her, but it's clear that they're in those situations where he could be, and even when they go to see Mrs. Cardenas, she assumes that they're together and implies that the meal she's making them is for their date or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they even declare, they're like, oh no, this is not a date. Haha, that's silly. And then eventually they go, oh, well, no. All right, yeah, maybe this is a date. And then, I don't know, something goes down and then they decide they're not going to do that. And then it's after that you see Karen sort of flirting with Matt.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what her motivation is, but I believe it in terms of, she spends all of her time with these two guys. They're both pretty, attractive or charming in their own ways. Like, it's perfectly reasonable to assume that she could have affection for both of them. It's just unfortunate because Foggy is doing all the legwork, and Matt isn't.
Yeah.
And so, so you feel for him because, like, he's putting himself out there, whereas Matt's just sort of meandering in and out of the room, and she's more interested in him than she is in Foggy. And I think they could play with that more. And I think when she was going through that time of isolation, when the two weren't speaking to each other, she could have tried to bounce back and forth between them, not necessarily romantically, but just emotionally, and that would have then tipped the scales again.
Yeah.
That would have been interesting to see.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know. Where do we go from here? It's like we've hit on.
I think we've hit on pretty much everything that I wrote up.
We should probably start wrapping up then before we just run out of steam and begin beating
before we just
abuse dead horse of sorts.
All right, cool. Well, then let's just have. What are your final thoughts on the show?
I was gonna ask you, and I've been thinking about this a lot. Also, is just kind of the difference between the sums of its parts being greater than the whole, and vice versa. Because I feel like we've had a really good conversation about it. You've kind of opened my eyes to, I'm very much, didn't binge watch 13 episodes straight, but sort of did like a chunk of 3 and then 4 and then 7 and, that's 14 episodes. Which doesn't even make sense. You know what I mean? Like I pretty much...
Emotional math, don't worry about it.
We pretty much binge watched it for the most part over the course of 3 days or so. And, I'm still in love with it, despite everything we've talked about, all the flaws that, that are apparent in this series and character flaws and things that don't make sense and stuff like that. I still felt like it was this semi-brilliant step in the right direction for what Marvel properties can become. Kind of like I think I might have mentioned in Now Loading and stuff like that. It's almost like with Daredevil, I feel like Netflix and Marvel together have proved that darker stories can be dark, and that they don't all need to be like the original Daredevil movie was. It's almost like this is like Marvel's Batman. It's like they've got this Batman-like property on their hands, and they've proved that it works. And by Batman, I mean, just kind of a character that's conflicted, a darker tone. It's kind of like Hell's Kitchen is Gotham, and blah, 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 blah. Largely successful. I'm still absolutely in love with it despite its flaws, and I still would recommend that anybody, check it out and just kind of get their own opinions on it and see what works for them and what doesn't. Based on what I've seen on, Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that, it seems like people generally love it, and so I feel like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And while, because some of the parts are stronger than others, overall it just makes for an incredibly dark and mysterious and kind of entertaining experience, that has some depth. Some parts are more shallow, some parts are deeper, but overall I feel it's one of the deeper things that Marvel has engaged with, recently. If you compare it to something like the Avengers and stuff like that, the Avengers, for as much as I love it, looks like a cartoon compared to this,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I really appreciate this for, attempting to tackle adult themes and stuff like that within the confines of a superhero-ish storyline.
Yeah, so I take it then you're definitely looking forward to next season.
Definitely looking forward to it. And hopefully,
what would you specifically like to see them improve?
Well, for as much as we harped on Fisk's character, if they're gonna bring Fisk back, please just iron that out. Take what's there and let us know how he gained his wealth, and maybe give us some more backstory on, what his relationship was like with his mom and his 20s and 30s, and let us know if she conspired with him, for like these grabs for power and stuff like that, or why she would have done it. Because I don't know, she was just like this sweet lady when he was younger and stuff like that. So I don't even know if any of that stuff makes sense. But yes, like we were saying, just let us know what he wants. Let us know, writers, directors, producers, everybody, that you guys know what he wants. Because then maybe second time around, like D'Onofrio will just nail the character in ways that he wasn't able to do this time.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I really appreciated about this story was that I feel like it was an origin story, like largely an origin story, but just handled really, really well. It wasn't as boring as a lot of origin stories are. I feel like obviously, for example, with things like Spider-Man and whatnot, people are saying like, oh, okay, so like now Disney's going to be involved in the, Spider-Man films to some extent here on out, and everybody's like, oh my god, if we get another origin story, just like freak out. And I'm really glad that this was, I mean, granted, they had 13 hours to do this versus 90 minutes or, 2 hours and stuff like that. And so it was able to be equal parts origin story and, the entire arc that was the series and stuff like that. But I'm really happy with how they broke apart the time to do that.
Yeah, part of the problem with a lot of the origin stories seems to be that 2/3 of the movie is origin, and then the last third is, oh, quick, kill this villain.
Yeah.
Whereas this was a development of the character in and out of the costume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, you know what character we didn't even touch on now that we're here in the finale is Stick.
Stick?
Yeah, his mentor when he's a kid.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, maybe there wasn't that much to be said about that. Like, it was what it was. But, I mean, there was some, like, I don't know, just the conflicts between, those two characters from a young age and obviously as adults and stuff like that. And Stick's ability to just kill. It's like part of what he does. It's part of who he is and stuff like that. And obviously we didn't even get into any of that, but whatever. But it seemed like there were some conversations that they were alluding to on the side with, Stick's on the phone with like some people in there. They're alluding to a much bigger plot and what's the people that Stick's involved with and how they're going to try to incorporate Daredevil / Murdoch's character into this larger threat, this larger sinister plot that seems to be brewing behind the lines that has nothing to do with Fisk, which leads me to believe that maybe Fisk won't be in the next season that much, and we're going to see everything that Stick's up to with those other people and how they're going to try to get Murdoch in on it, and, they might just form a completely new puzzle,
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, a completely different game of chess as opposed to continuing this one.
Yeah.
But, yeah, just build upon this. I feel like they're going to be able to, the producers, everybody involved in this production is going to be able to take a step back, hopefully have conversations like we're having, obviously, and just see what worked and what didn't, and just iron it all out. I feel like the foundation for Hell's Kitchen and, this darker side of this Marvel universe and stuff like that is incredibly... this is like a very good first step, and I'm excited to see where they take it from here, knowing that they can hopefully just do better the second time around. For as good as it was, just do better.
Yeah.
How about you?
Pretty much on the same page there. I really want the dialogue to improve. I want that to be a result of, as you mentioned, them having a better understanding of the dramatic arc that they're going for. I was really frustrated by the end of the season with all of this. I'm a big swinging, like all this sort of like intimidation monologue nonsense. It's not creative. It's not engaging. It's just a bunch of people trying to show that they're the big scary person in the room, and that's not drama. That's just ego on display, and that. From the first time that it happened, like it was disengaging to me, and I don't like seeing it anywhere. It's not interesting at all. And then on top of that, we had some weird performances, like from Vincent D'Onofrio, and that mixed with terrible dialogue. It was frustrating as hell to try and pay attention to, because it wasn't that sort of dialogue and those sorts of performances don't go anywhere. If it's not building the drama, if it's not building the character, then you're just waiting for something else to happen. And in this case, you would end up waiting for action, which tended to be pretty good. But we're not getting insight in the character. We're not getting more information about the story. We're just waiting for the next and then.
Yeah.
I would like to see more action like the end of season 2, if they could do, or at the end of episode 2, if they could do more, some really well choreographed, carefully plotted, and carefully shot action scenes. I almost wouldn't care about how bad the drama is. I would watch solely for that spectacle. It reminded me a lot of the single take from True Detective. Have you watched that yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. There's an episode with about a 3 to 5 minute long take that is epic.
Okay.
And even though True Detective is awesome start to finish, it was one of those things where once it happened, I went, ugh, now I have to wait and see if they do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I highly recommend True Detective. So I was really impressed with the action. I was really impressed with the way that they portrayed his superpowers. And I'm really impressed here and there with the brilliant bits of drama that they come across. The Karen's isolation thing, the art, the reflection in the art thing.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the comparison between Fisk and Matt in terms of their upbringing and their fathers and the influence that they have had. And the exact same situation, or the other side of the same coin that they find themselves on. They both want to clean up the city. Neither of them seem to really know how to do it. They both have sort of an ambiguous approach to it, in addition to like their moral ambiguity. So the show has a lot of strengths. I think you're right. It's greater than the sum of its parts, because if I added it up strictly by its parts, I'd be fairly unimpressed. But there are a lot of good ideas here that have the soil and the nutrients to blossom into something much stronger.
I was going to ask you, in regards to consuming media, would you, well, I assume that did you semi-binge watch this series?
I kind of did. I think I watched 3 or 4 episodes the first day that I watched, which was the Saturday following. And then I told myself I had to slow down.
Yeah.
Because when I watched The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, I did all 13 episodes, like I said, in like 2 or 3 days. Okay. And honestly, I can't remember what happened. I couldn't tell you what happened in one episode versus another. And that's a problem. I want to be able to think about what I saw. I did the same thing with 30 Rock, which is funny, the Tina Fey connection. But I would watch entire seasons of 30 Rock in a couple of days, and I remember specific jokes and I remember general arcs, but I can't remember how they all fit together. And I feel like binge watching, even though it's fun, lends itself to creating this amorphous blob in my brain.
Yeah.
Where I have had an experience, but I can't pick it apart. So unless I'm sitting there with someone else who stops the show with me and we talk about what we just experienced and then move on, I need to slow down.
Yeah. Part of me, I'm torn on how I feel about the whole thing. It's like, from the standpoint of blogging and being able to do these podcasts and talk about it and be part of the conversation and stuff like that. It's almost like we are forced in a way to binge watch it, in order to be on point with it. And remain relevant, because I don't know, I guess what I'm getting at is it always, 13 hours, we watched 13 hours in 3 days, and it's all there, and it's, our choices to consume at whatever pace that we want. And I really, really appreciate not having to wait week to week. But part of me wonders, how that affects the way, you're saying, that you perceive each individual episode and your ability to digest it. There's a part of me that wonders, well, if I would have waited 4 days and then just done a 2-parter back-to-back for the finale or something like that, would I have liked it more? Would I have appreciated the final battle between, Murdoch and Fisk that much more and whatnot? And, it's kind of like, seeing a movie in a theater environment versus at home with bathroom breaks and lights on and stuff like that. Part of me, I don't know. I think
it's a fascinating concern. When you make a movie that gets released in theaters, that the audience is going to be there for the 2 or hour and a half to 3 hours or whatever, and how to pace the drama, because you have this time slot that you're working with. When you create a TV show, an episodic TV show, that you have this much time to work with, and how to pace the drama.
Yeah.
And that you have your audience's attention for that long. when you release all 13 episodes, 13 hours worth of cinema, all at one time, and your audience can watch it in any pace that they want, how on earth do you structure your drama?
Yeah.
You break it up by episode, and that's great. That's still a good idea, and you still should structure each episode with the same sort of arcs. Maybe you just do it in a simple 3-act structure, and that works great. But then you have 13 3-act structures. Does that work? Do you try to create a 5-act structure out of 13 episodes? You start asking these really, the metaphysics of drama. How do you structure your story when you have no idea how your audience is going to watch it? I don't know the answer to that question. True Detective is 8 episodes. That seems very deliberate, as opposed to the 13 or the 12 that most other cable TV shows get.
Right.
And so I haven't broken it up myself. I don't know how each episode quite comes apart in terms of acts or in plot points. I should watch it again to be more certain, or to see, because there's probably something going on there that's very, very deliberate. Because 8 is not 5, and how do you divide 5 into 8 if you're going to do a 5-act structure, or 3 over 8, and it still doesn't divide up evenly. So, and that's only if you're working with those. Maybe they created a 7 or 8-act structure, or who knows. There are so many variables, and there are so many options within those variables still. I wouldn't know how to structure it most efficiently anyway. I think one thing that we have to be open to is the idea that a smart filmmaker, a smart cinema artist, if we want to call them, is going to deliberately structure their story and know how many episodes they're working with or how many hours they're working with. And we have to be open to a completely new style of storytelling.
Yeah.
Or actually, maybe it's not even completely new. We've had comic books for a long time. And those work on 6 to 12 issues at a time.
Do those get released?
So maybe we should reflect.
Is that week to week for comic books? That a new one comes out, or not even?
It's usually monthly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's every 6 months they put the 6 issues together and you get your trade graphic novel. And that's usually one arc. And then those arcs lead into the next one.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's serial storytelling. It's episode by episode, but it's this, it's over a period of time.
Yeah. Oh, man, interesting. Yeah, at some point I'll have to go back and I'll have to watch more. I'm probably going to load up episode 2 at some point really soon, like you were saying, just to watch that hallway fight again.
Yeah. Honestly, go back and watch the first couple episodes, because I saw them completely differently, and I also think the first episode is the best episode. I think it's the one that has the strongest in terms of dramatic tension and development, as well as I think it's, other than the hallway fight at the end of episode 2, it's got the best action, most clear action. I think it's the strongest episode, because I felt like once they introduce Fisk, we start getting a whole bunch of Fisk's nonsense, and that's when everyone just tries to start intimidating each other, and everyone's trying to pull one over, and it just turns into this sort of nightmare. But before that, up until they introduce Fisk, it's trying to figure out what's going on in Hell's Kitchen. It's
interesting. Yeah. One thing, maybe we're going to keep going on little sideway tangents unless we stop ourselves. I want to say the one thing that was interesting that I knew that they did from the beginning, I just read about it online or something. I guess in the comic books, I believe that it's a story about, like Hell's Kitchen is still there and blah, blah, blah. But I think it's more so him trying to clean up, I don't know if it's Irish mob or Italian mob. It's basically, just against the mob and stuff like that. And how to keep it part of Marvel's current cinematic universe and stuff like that, they made, kind of like the backdrop, the whole, New York and the aliens and stuff like that from like the Avengers film and stuff like that, when obviously none of that's in the original comic books and stuff like that. And Hell's Kitchen changes as a reaction to what happened to New York as a greater whole. Versus, I think in the comic books, it's just like, this street level storytelling with like Daredevil versus the mob and stuff like that. I don't know, just little things here and there.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get sidetracked. Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, why not?
All right.
All right, well, thanks for listening, everybody. Glad you made it to the end.
Yes.
Yeah. So look forward to our next podcast. We have no idea what it'll be about or when it'll be, but Matt's been putting up regular content otherwise as well. So
yeah.
Hopefully I'll get something up shortly as well. I'm trying to finish up the Vanishing of Ethan Carter and a couple other games, so I will try and put something together about those. In the meanwhile, I'm Scott William Hannon for 30 and Nerdy. Across the way from me
is Matt Sternad, at 30 and Nerdy on Twitter. We have Facebook, Etsy, YouTube, everywhere. And by the way, wherever you listen to this, whether it's on 30andnerdy.com, it'll be on SoundCloud and YouTube and iTunes. Feel free to leave us comments. Yeah, everything's on iTunes now. Like, so as soon as we upload to SoundCloud, rather, that sends the feed over to iTunes. It takes a little bit longer. Like, sometimes it can take upwards of a few hours or like a half a day or something like that. Yeah, but it all goes there automatically. So you can just subscribe over on iTunes, and then depending on how you have it set up, I guess just have it automatically downloaded onto your devices and whatnot. But feel free to leave us comments or ask questions or whatever. This is another thing, like, we're looking here. This conversation ended up being, a little over 2 hours long and stuff like that. And so if you have your own opinions or questions or whatnot, just like hit us up and let's talk about this, because like we said, it's 13 hours, so worth of Daredevil in Marvel-ness. So let's keep the conversation going, wherever it's at.
There's plenty to talk about.
Yeah. So anything else?
No, I think I'm all set.
All right, cool. Thanks for your time. That was a good conversation. It was enlightening.
Yeah, it was fun. We'll do another one again soon.
All right, so for 30andnerdy.com, we will catch you later.